Hello. Hello, hello. Hmm. Perhaps it is ironic, if you will, that what I need to do before I sit down to do a live about why just being present isn't enough is to get present so that I can be more fully here. Now, actually, before I dive in, I want to just say hello and welcome to those of you who are joining. I love having people here live. I love being able to have some dialogue. So at any point, I always really invite your questions, your comments, any shares from your personal, your real life, questions about how this might apply to your life. I love that. I believe all these things really, they're only as useful insofar as we bring them down into the tangible rather than just the esoteric or the abstract. So welcome, welcome. And welcome to anyone who's watching the replay as well. And again, whether this is on Facebook or YouTube or wherever you happen to see it, please bring your questions and your comments, and I will absolutely come back and engage there. So with all that said, I was starting to dive in with this piece of that as the live went live, as it were, I paused and I took a breath and I sort of quote unquote got present. And I thought it's so funny to be doing this thing that we call, getting present, when one of the things I want to talk about is why I don't believe that this phrase, like to just be present, is really enough. Oh, hi. Yeah, welcome. Welcome to those of you who are joining. And as is often the case, part of me wants to just dive right in. And one of the pieces around that is that I actually think it's not so much the getting present that's the issue. It's the way that humans tend to interpret this idea of getting present or just be present that tends to be more limiting than helpful sometimes. So where do I want to start with this? I want to start where do I want to start? Hello. I want to start with the hook. And what really grabbed my attention, and it's happened a number of times over the last several years, as I've been either working with an individual or working within a group, and somehow this will come up, is that I see this specifically within kind of the self-help, personal growth, development world, such as it is this swing, and it seems very natural in life in all kinds of ways. There's a pendulum swing, and we've had sort of a swing between what we tend to call more mainstream culture, although I think there's some problems with using those words. Hi, Alicia, thank you. I was having such a weird hair moment, so I appreciate the compliment. But what we consider to be more sort of mainstream or normal, or maybe the way that many of us were raised, which had to do with, don't share the painful parts, don't show that you're sad, it's not okay to be angry, hide your shame, act on top of it. these kinds of things. And so then there's this pendulum swing, and it's had really positive, beneficial effects, which has to do with, revealing our vulnerability and sharing when we feel afraid, and being willing to share the shame along the process or the pain. And where I've seen the pendulum swing to some extent is this over identification with pain, shame, sadness, anxiety, and rather than having those, there's sort of the repression of that, if you will, which of course is not useful. So the repression of our pain, the avoidance of pain, the repression of sadness or anger, the hiding of shame, the maybe secrecy, right? All of these things are not useful. Totally got it. However, then there's this pendulum swing to what I would call an over-identification with those parts of ourselves as, but that's me. That's the authentic me. And I think it's somewhat of a collapsing. There's a phrase that we used to use when we were just starting the work of Authentic World with the Authentic Man program, the Authentic Woman experience, and the Authentic Releading games that we were offering in this piece. And we used to talk about this idea of hide nothing. And one of the distinctions that we made at that time was that hide nothing is not the same as share everything. So that's a Facebook Live for another time to go deep into that. But again, this is like this collapsing, that because these used to be things, or because perhaps we were raised that these were things to be hidden, now anytime we have them, we're like, I have to share all of it, or I'm not being authentic, or you're not seeing me. And I saw this very clearly with a woman that I was working with recently who just is magnificent. Like, magnificent, has a way with words, sees so much beauty, has so much insight, has beauty, like can express herself through her body in all these incredible ways. Like, it's just magnificent in so many ways. And also has pain, struggles, shame about certain things. These things come up. And there was a way that what I was witnessing over time was that she seemed, I don't want to say incapable, but it was like, it almost seemed incapable. I don't believe that she actually is, but there was this way that anytime she was going to share her magnificence, she had to show us her pain or her shame or her struggle or her contraction first. And when I sort of checked about it, like just bring the thing. There was some version, I don't think she used these words, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but it was a little bit, but then you won't see me, or then I won't have been fully shared. And I thought, well, maybe. And it seemed like she was equating those parts as her. If you don't see her pain, her shame, her judgment, her challenge, her struggle, her contraction, her limitation, her self-judgment, that we weren't seeing her. And I'm like, I think if we don't see all these other things, we're not seeing you. And so often it's all of that in some way we never quite get to the magnificence. And that there is now, and perhaps this is all just necessary, right? There's a bit of a repressive culture that we've been moving away from over the last 50 years-ish now. That's the process. and now we've come to this point where it seems like, and there was a need to say, it's okay to be sad, it's okay to be angry, it's okay to show your frustration, it's okay to share your self-judgment. Let's reveal our shame vulnerably, and that's a way that we can be connected. And that we're at a point where we've gotten a little stuck or stagnant there, and it's like, hey, there's nuance available, and we have other ways, like we can connect through my brilliance to your brilliance, my magnificence to your magnificence. And even to call out that, saying like, oh, this is really vulnerable for me to share, is a way to hide, rather than simply saying the thing that is vulnerable, is putting a bit of a a protective wall between you and me by saying, this is really vulnerable to share, or I'm afraid to say this, or oh, I'm having all this self-judgment come up about talking now, but I'm going to do it anyway because I'm practicing in that realm. It's sort of like, what would happen if we just took away that preamble and did the thing? Sorry, I have my notes on my phone and my phone locked, so now I have to like unlock my phone. So much technology. So that's where I was seeing this, and that there's a piece about when we use this word, just be present, or stay in the present moment, or what are you present to, or share what's present for you, that I see now again, if I to some extent, I'm probably revealing the bubble in which I live, right? And I'm sure there are other realms, other places in the world, other kind of conversations to be within where this wouldn't be the case. And in the world that I live in, what I find is when that's what's said, what's present, what's coming up for you now, what are you present to, what's most present for you, there's a tendency to almost always hook into the excuse me, the self-judgment, the shame, that I'm afraid to say this, but I'm worried that you'll judge me, but I'm going to say it anyway, this kind of piece. And that there's almost this, oh, what's that snake that eats its own tail? I'm not going to remember right now, but maybe one of you can put it in the comments. That would be so helpful. But there's this way that it becomes this like self-fulfilling loop. And it's like, oh, that's how you'll know me, rather than the fullness of me. And then, so that's a bit of the relational piece, but I see it also even just it's not interpersonally, it's like within oneself. So often people are habituated to go towards what's not working, or the self-judgment, or the pain, and to get stuck there. And so I believe that actually what I'm going to share right now is a facet of what I would call true presence. Like when we're going to talk about what it really is. And I'm more talking about just be present in kind of its colloquial usage. Stephanie said loop snake. Yes. And there's like a name for this actual creature. If my friend Craig was here, he would know. It's a mythical creature. It's a snake that eats its own tail. So it has this looping quality, and I see it within people, and I've seen it within myself. And this is why I mean, partly I speak to it because I really see this with the people who come and work with me. Yes, Aurora Boris, I knew someone would come through for me, and I knew it was like that, but I was afraid to say it and just say it like a little bit wrong. So thank you, Stephen. So I had this experience. I think it's easier to share this with, and James came through for me too. Thank you. I had this experience. I'll share two stories and I'll try to keep them a little bit short. The first one was almost 15 years ago. And I think this was the first time that like this piece really clicked in. And my experience with all things like this is that it is really true what they say, which is that insight does change everything. And you can, like, literally your world can be changed in an instant. And I have had that happen multiple times. So I'm really not saying that that's not true. However, I will say it's insight applied insight then ultimately is what has this long lasting effect where, you know, you look back and you're like, oh, now my life has really changed because I've done something about, or I've done something with this insight. But the first time that it really clicked for me was about 15 years ago. And at least in a conscious way, now I can kind of link back to other experiences I had. However, so keeping it short, I was with my then boyfriend, and we had gone to be with my family for Christmas. And then it was like the day after Christmas, or maybe 2 days after Christmas. And he was going to be, we were both leaving. We'd been down visiting my family. We were both going to leave. And he was going to go back up to the San Francisco Bay Area where we lived at the time. And I was going to go to the Santa Cruz Mountains and assist at a meditation retreat for teenagers that would go from this time a little bit after Christmas through the new year. And we got in a fight. And it wasn't like a yelling, like an expressive fight exactly, but it was like a question came up in our relationship about the nature of our agreements to each other and how they were going to be during this time that we were apart, and in which we felt differently and we wanted different things. And it was really painful. And it was like, it may have come up on the morning that we were then going to separate that afternoon, or maybe it came up the night before and we were up very, very late, processing, he may not have been crying, but I was probably crying and, feeling heartbroken and thinking, this is the end, or does this have to be the end, or we want different things, and how can he want this? But it was very close to this time when we were going to separate, so we didn't come to conclusion. And we were also with my family. So again, I remember literally being out to breakfast with them and being in all this pain and like walking around the area where my family lived at the time and where I grew up, and sort of being heartbroken, and my boyfriend at the time trying to comfort me, but at the same time he was still saying, I want this thing that's different than what you want. And so anyway, just like angsty suffering. Excuse me, I have this tickle in my throat. And so we said goodbye without real conclusion. And I went then to be one of the people who was holding this meditation retreat for teenagers. And what that meant was that in a way, I was holding the space, I was being available to them, I was holding some of the structure, and I, in some way I needed to be on. It wasn't like I needed to pretend like I was, somebody that I wasn't, but I needed to be kind of on. And they're teenagers, right? So they really need us to kind of hold them, because they're like, ah. If you remember being a teenager and the hormones and all those pieces that are up, and just the figuring out who one is, and they're here meditating, which is intense, right? It's intense to be with yourself. But it also meant that I was meditating and sitting still and in silence and being with my own thoughts for hours upon hours a day as well. It was like a 10-day retreat. We also had lecture, and there were, other adults there that I was connecting with and what have you. But there was a lot of silent meditation, which left me a lot of time to go back over and over and over the conversations that my boyfriend and I had been having, and the disagreement, and the where was he now, and what might be happening, and what was going to happen when I got home, and all of these. And it was so painful. And I just would catch myself in these loops of like, planning for when I got back. But it wasn't even like the moment I got back or saw him. I wouldn't catch myself, like trying to figure out where I was going to live, because clearly I was going to have to move out of the place we were at together. And I would catch myself, 25 steps down the road, kind of quote unquote planning, which is what we call worry when we don't want to admit that we're just in an anxiety loop. So, and there was this moment where there were two things that happened. And so, actually, I'm going to back up for just a second. So, of course, being a Buddhist meditation retreat and all this silent meditation, that's the whole point, is right, to be present. But what would happen when I tried to just be present was all these thought loops. And also, it's not the thing when we say like, oh, it's just your thinking, or just like, you're thinking. Our thoughts have an impact on our physiological body. I mean, we know this. And so we had to work with both. So at that point, I had also amped up my own physiology to the point where I was like, kind of a wreck. I had so much kind of fight, flight, freeze response. I can't think what the hormone is called, but like the anxiety hormone, basically, or the fear, because I was feeding myself fear thoughts about what would happen. So of course my body's responding. And so now I'm also having a physiological response, and sitting still with my own self and just being present with my experience was not helping. Now, I'm not saying that meditation is not helpful, or silent meditation or stillness meditation. Fucking fantastic practices. I've done, countless hours upon hours upon hours in my life, and I absolutely credit it with, enormous amounts of growth and stability in my life. However, in that moment, it was like something else was also needed. And so two things happened within that. One was I was able to be aware. I was like, oh, I don't know what's happening anywhere other than where I am. I don't know what's happening for this boyfriend of mine. I don't know where he is. I don't know who he's with. I don't know what he's doing. I don't know what's going to happen while I'm gone. And so I could plan for 1,000,000,001 eventualities, and I could go home and I could meet an experience that I haven't planned for. Even if I plan for 1,000,000,001, I could literally still go home and have, one of another infinite variety of experiences be the one that's the one that I need to meet when I go home. And that kind of helped. I was like, okay, so this isn't useful. But I was still like, but what else do I do? I'm just here, like, quote unquote, present with myself, and it's not working. It's not helping. I can't get out of this loop. And so this is the power of expanding our awareness. That we were doing walking meditation, and we were in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and there was a very light kind of misty rain happening. And in that moment, I don't even know what precipitated, or how did I know to do this? I don't know. But I thought, what else is happening? Or what else do I notice other than just what's happening for me? And all these thought loops and this physiological anxiety and fear that I'm having, that I'm experiencing, that I'm feeling. And I was able to widen my awareness just enough to feel some of that light misty rain. And I was like, oh, right, I can feel this. And it helped me to also, then I was able to ask myself the question, am I okay right now? Because I could widen my awareness outside of what felt like I was not okay, and the fear thought loops and the physiological fear loops. And I was able to say, am I okay right now? And also widen my awareness beyond just what was happening inside my own skin. And I was like, oh yeah, I am okay. And I could feel the coolness of the air when I would breathe, and this misty rain on my skin, which was quite pleasurable. And I could see the trees and the mist and the fog in them and the beauty of that. And I could see, oh, I am actually here right now. And I don't know anything else that's not happening except right here. So in a way, of course, this is being present. I was being present rather than jumping to a place where I was not, or to a future that I was not in. But I also had to expand beyond just being present with myself, which is so often when we use this phrase around being present, or what are you present to, or let's get present. There's a habituated response to just me and mine, my thoughts, my physiological response, my experience. And that's limited. It's useful, and it's a limited perspective. And so that capacity to actually widen our awareness. So in that moment, it was the trees. It was that I could see the mountains, again, with the mist in them. It was that I could feel the rain. It was that I could see the other people doing their walking meditation. And inside of that, I could go, oh yes, actually, I'm okay right now. And it wasn't about fighting with the thoughts, like, you don't know that that's true, and what if it's something else, and think happy thoughts, and he loves you. It wasn't like trying to go counter to those thoughts, or you're safe. I wasn't telling myself you're safe, you're safe, you're safe. It was actually asking myself the question, am I okay right now? And then being willing to let my awareness be wider than my own self, and have that inform, yes, I am okay. So another time that happened was just, I think it was 2 years ago now. It might have only been like a year or a year and a half. And I can't remember now all the pieces of this, but there had been a sort of a series of very challenging events. I'd had a hard day. Some things didn't go my way. I was afraid about something. And in the midst of that, maybe I hadn't slept well. Like, that never works well for me. I also found out that someone that I had known very, very closely, and who was very close in age to me, had died very, very suddenly. And this person, although we hadn't stayed close friends, had had a very, very deep impact on my life. And some of the teachings that he had brought, and these things, he'd had this incredibly deep impact on my life. And I found out he died, and it just rocked my world. But there I was with my children, and also needing to be with them. And we shared a garden with another friend of mine at the time. And because I was sort of out of sorts in a variety of other ways, and I was kind of caught in my own, in a way, again, going back to the beginning, like I was a little caught in my own pain, in my own internal, present with my own internal experience. I wasn't as attentive to my children, and ultimately it wasn't destroyed, but we had this experience where they sort of destroyed something that belonged to my friend in this shared garden that we had. And it was it was basically a very precious flower that had like one bloom and only blooms once. And they like pulled petals off. And I found it, I was horrified, but she found it, she was very upset, understandably, but also I took it very personally. And it was another time when I had this experience of not like, okay, I have to get over this pain, or I can't feel this, or I need to like shift into something else. I wasn't fighting with what was so. So it's not this, what I spoke about at the beginning, it's not this repression of fear, anxiety, sadness, anger, shame, self-judgment. It's not the repression of those, but neither is it the over-identification, like, oh, if I feel this, I have to just navel gaze about it forever because that's authentic. I was able to say, I sat on this bench in this garden. And again, both times I was outdoors, so that's worth noticing. I don't think it's absolutely necessary. I do think that nature lends herself to this kind of inquiry. And I thought, what else can I be aware of in this moment? Yes, my heart is breaking because this man just died, and he had 2 children, and all of his friends in our shared community, and yes, my children maybe just ruined this precious flower. And yes, all these other things that I was struggling with in my life, maybe that somebody I had a fight with, or these things, yes, all of that. Can I have all of that? And can I expand even a little bit more to notice what else? And in that moment, and this is this interplay between what else outside of me and what else inside of me, or at least within my own experience, is that partly it was the sun. So in that first story, it was that light rain, right? And in this story, it was like, oh, I could feel the sun, and it was so pleasurable on my skin. And it opened the door just enough that I was like, and what else? With everything I'm feeling, what else? And I could hear the wind. There are these very, very tall trees there. And when the wind blows in the tops, it has this exquisite sound. And I thought, oh, yes, the sound of the wind. And it became this meditation for me on, and what else? And what else? And it expanded to, that my children they were nearer to me, and they were playing well with each other, like, oh, and their laughter, And what else? That there was some thing that was just starting to grow or just starting to bloom. And what else? And so there's a couple pieces to this, but one piece that I think is so important is that I believe that we are so much bigger, and we have we have a wider capacity than we give ourselves credit for. We think, oh, I can only, I can either be ashamed or I can take action. And it's like, what if you can do both? What if you don't have to repress your self-judgment and shame in order to take action? What if they can actually arise together? I can only, feel my sadness or my joy. Like, what if you can actually feel them both? I can only be present to the suffering of the world or the beauty of the world. And I believe that we can be present to both, and that it doesn't come from denying one. It's not like, oh, I'm so present to the suffering of the world. And it's like, actually, just be present to the joy, or you need to shift your focus or be more grateful. Because most of that, as well-meaning as it is in some repression to not feeling the other one as much. And what I want to encourage is that we widen. That it doesn't become about, I can only focus here or focus here, so I better focus on the positive. Or I can only feel this or feel this, so I might as well feel the good one. Or in order to be authentic, I can only feel the painful one. Or there just doesn't have to be an either or. This is the both and this is the beauty of our human capacity. And I don't know, maybe other beings have it too. I'm not even going to weigh in on that. But what I do know is that as humans, we have this capacity. We have the capacity not just to shift perspective, but to actually widen our literal gaze. There's an actual physical practice that we used to teach, which had to do with literally widening the gaze, and it has physiological, neurological impact. And I probably will be teaching this, and then we'll be using it at the women's wilderness retreat that I'm teaching in May up near Mount Shasta. However, without going into the specific physical practice, you can literally widen your gaze, like your actual visual gaze. You can widen your energetic field, like in order, what can I feel around me? What can I feel in me? Because again, within ourselves, we might be feeling real like grief or fear or sadness or rage, and we actually can feel pleasure at the same time, or joy or delight. And neither one actually negates the other. We can expand our capacity to be, so this is where it also touches in on the world. And this is, I shared the Venn diagram of, if, there's that saying, like, if you're not angry, you're not paying attention. And somebody made a meme, thank you, whoever made this meme, of the two circles. And one is, if you're not angry, you're not paying attention. The other is, if you're only angry, you're not paying attention, and they cross over. And I believe that that's true. And that's not only true about anger. It's like, if you're not sad, you're not paying attention. But if you're only sad, you're not paying attention. If you're not happy, you're not paying attention. But if you're only happy, you're also not paying attention. Like, not only our own lives are more nuanced and subtle and complex than this, but absolutely so is the world. And that it's not about like, oh my gosh, I really need to shift my perspective and pay attention to the suffering of, the people who just died, and the families who just lost loved ones, fathers, brothers, sisters, children, in New Zealand. Or I need to shift my perspective to the good things in the world so I can stay positive and grateful. We all, I love you, Amy. I'm just seeing like your little nuggets. And I know, like, I so know how much you not only know this, but get this. So we have the capacity to see, to hear, to feel, to know all of that at the same time. And I believe that is where our greatest power in our life comes from, and then our capacity to have the biggest impact in the world. And I don't mean, it could be like, the leader of a movement or change the world. But our capacity to move through the world in this way with this widened awareness allows us then to bring that with us wherever we go. So I know that when I can do this, I know, for instance, that my children can feel it. And I'm less likely to get overwhelmed by them because I can be aware of what's going on for them and aware of what's going on for me and aware of what's going on in the street and aware of some like the beautiful moon that just popped up, and aware of some tragedy that I just read about in the news, and that allows me to be with them in a different way. When I think that my focus has to be so narrow, or that I only have attention for this, I'm so much more likely to be like, oh my God, like stop doing whatever you're doing because it's distracting me from this, or I have to, there's like a pointedness that comes at a loss of our capacity to be with, and therefore to dance with, truly. So I'm going to check my notes here for just a moment. Actually, I saw there was a comment up here. I see your comments, Amy, and I love that. And then I also know that I saw, I think you pronounce your name, Ray, said, and it's also okay to be exuberant, excited, joyful, playful. And these full expressions can still be really vulnerable too. Yes. So that's like a whole other realm. This is where I think that piece of when we say like, this is really vulnerable, but we put this sort of layer rather than just being that, which is really vulnerable. So to be fully whatever it is, and to be all of it. I had a woman who's in my No Man Diet program right now, and she just did the most fucking awesome, like expressive video movement, performative piece maybe that I've ever seen. And it was so full of everything. Like it was sort of weird and quirky, and then graceful, and then, tender, and then sensual. Like, we're all of it. Each one of us is already all of it. And it's about our willingness to feel all of it, our willingness to express all of it, our willingness to be present to the all of it within each human being that we come in contact with, and then everything else in the world. So I know that could seem overwhelming, but I think that's the beauty of this practice, is that it ceases to be overwhelming when we're actually willing to expand that way. So I 100% agree, Ray, that often one of the most vulnerable things we can do is to be truly joyful or exuberant or giddy. And I see James's comment, which says, sounds like Red K Elders. I don't know who that is, but maybe I'll go check them out afterwards. So I want to check in on my notes for just a moment. So just a little bit more on this piece around, because this is so personal, around where do we over-identify as this is me? And when we use this more habituated way of being present or getting present with ourselves, we're more, whatever it is that we consider to be me is where we'll go when we check in. Like someone says, let's get present. We'll go right there, because that's like the super highway of our psychology or our neurobiology or our thought loop, or it's just the super highway. It's not, you're not special that you do that. Everybody does that. And it's nothing to feel tragic about, but it's worth noticing. Where do I always go? And for many people in sort of the personal growth, self-help development world, we go to the kind of the what's wrong. And I think it's partly because we want to fix it, which is like, again, its own topic for another day. But it's also because in this world, and again, I believe that this is beautiful, it just needs to be expanded. We've been given permission for the sad, the mad, the judgment, the fear, the angry, that we it's like, oh, those are also included. And so we've gone like, oh, so that's the place to check in about what's real right now. And so that becomes an over-identification with like, that's me. And so I need to share that because then that's the authentic me, or that's how I know I'm me, or that's the part of me that you have to know or you don't know me. And anything that we feel that like about, I believe is worth exploring, getting curious about, and questioning. Not because it's like that's not true, but it's probably not true, or it's not only true. And so many people will find the like, oh, I found the pain, or I found the fear, or I found the, the helplessness, or I found the self-judgment. And so really asking ourselves that question, like, and what else? What else is also true within me? What else is also true outside? And also, again, I would say kind of in the, well, let's just say there are many people who would do well to become more aware of some of the places of pain that are happening in the world. And then for those of us that tend to get very focused on things like social justice, it can be very easy to go like, no, but I have to focus. I can't look away, or I can't not, like, I have to keep my attention focused there. And again, it's not about focus here or focus here, but how do I expand my awareness for all of it? And back to the Venn diagram, if you're not angry, you're not paying attention. But if you're only angry, you're not paying attention. Is that I believe that it's our capacity to hold all of that. That's truly where we can do the most good in the world. But each of us has to do the work to notice, do I love that meme because of the, if it's not angry, you're not paying attention part? Or do I love it because of the, if you're only angry, you're not paying attention? And I want to send it to people so that they see that part, because I'm attached to making sure that people see that, that you should be angry or that you should not be angry part. So whichever part you're attached to, that's where your work lies. Like, look, everybody else, like, they just get to do their own thing, such as it were. And that there is this place of going like, oh, I'm really attached to making sure that people see what they should be angry about. Like, okay, can I stay focused on those things that I am fucking pissed that they exist in the world? And it's not about even changing my perspective, but simply widening it. Can I hold that and still see it and still feel it and still know the truth and the depth of it and let it impact me, and also see what is beautiful or uplifting or amazing or awe-inspiring in the world, in humans, at the same time. The last, it's almost like a cliffhanger to leave you on, so maybe I'll end up doing another video about this at another time, but I do want to drop this in because this is kind of one more a layer to the onion, or one more circle to the Venn diagram, or another way that this applies. And it was kind of highlighted for me yesterday as I was sitting with a couple, and one of the things that came up was an area, it was a man and a woman, and it was an area where the woman felt afraid. And he wasn't doing anything, like to make her afraid. But she felt afraid to share certain things. And the man had this very beautiful and totally well-intended desire to let her know that she didn't need to be afraid at all, and that he wanted all of her. And what I saw in that moment was, and it's not that he in any conscious way didn't want her fear, but the way that he was then saying, oh, you don't need to be afraid, baby, like, I love all of you. There's nothing that you can't share. Like, you don't need to be afraid to share those parts or to, this, because I love all of you. It made it in an unconscious way. It had her imagine that the part of her that was afraid wasn't included. And so it's, how do we widen it out into, oh, even not to say that I want you to be afraid, or that I want you to feel these things that you don't want to feel, or that part of you is right or correct in any way in thinking that you need to be afraid. And the part of you that is afraid is also included in this. And that's the widening out. It's not like we're our true selves once we get rid of self-judgment, fear, blockages, limiting beliefs, blah, 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 blah. Like, we're already our true selves, including all of that. And I believe that the more that we include ourselves in the circle of wholeness, and that we include all the parts of ourselves, including the fear, including the self-judgment, including the limiting beliefs, including not saying like, well, now I'm going to act on my limiting beliefs, or I'm going to believe that they're true, but that they are part of me. And that the more that I can actually go like, oh, right now, that's part of my wholeness, and to include them in the circle, the more likely actually that there will be a shift, or that they will relax their position. So I share that last story in a way as a reminder of the places where, with all our good intentions and with so much, like we love people. We love people so much that we're like, oh, don't be afraid, or like, oh, you don't need to feel bad about that, or oh, it's like, but they do, or they are, and so how do we say, I love you, including that you're afraid right now? I'm not saying your fear is justified and right and we should give it credence, but I love you, including your fear. I love you, including that you are judging yourself right now. I love you, including that you have a limiting belief around whatever. I'm rolling my eyes every time because I don't like that phrase, but so I love you even if you love the phrase limiting beliefs. So it's the widening. And I think that's the kind of an evolution of the way that we look at these things, that rather than shifting perspective, which sort of goes from like one limited perspective to another limited perspective, and can I shift my perspective? It's, can I widen my perspective? Can I widen my awareness? Can I widen my feeling body? Can I widen my literal vision? Can I widen my listening? Can I widen my capacity to hold all of who I am and all of who you are? So, and can I widen my idea of who I am beyond what I am identified as believing is me? And for some people, that's like, I'm a happy person, right? Can you widen to like, I'm a happy person and I'm a sad person? Or I'm somebody who feels happy and sad. I'm somebody who is filled with joy and got hurt, is hurting, or had my feelings hurt. I'm a deeply feeling tragic person. Like, okay, can you be a deeply feeling tragic person who also feels joy or is witness to beauty at the same time? And that neither one needs to negate the other. So it's a widening. It's a widening. I'm going to check these last comments. And if you have anything you want to add to the conversation, now would be a great time. I'm going to sign off in the next 5 minutes. Stephanie said, I meant to say hoop snake, and silly me, I thought they were real. They might be. That they could grab their own tail and really roll. That is a delightful idea of a creature. And honestly, with having my children and at the exact ages they are, which is almost 10 and 6, like I'm coming, like there are things that come in, I'm like, that's amazing. Like I'm learning about all kinds of things. Had to do a research project with my almost 10-year-old about reptiles. And the question was, do reptiles have a voice? And so that Google search, man, took us down some really weird rabbit holes. There may very well be a hoop snake, Stephanie. Stephanie also said, I used a similar tool during a time of deep struggle, pain, and depression, where I brought as many of the sounds, smells, visuals as were in my perspective, all outside of self. Your words are widening the gaze. Sounds similar. Yes, exactly. I think they're both really important, but it's the both. It's not, like, oh, what's happening inside you is more important. Oh, what's happening outside you is more important. It's like, can I hold both? So beautiful to hear. James, I will check out that link when I'm not on Facebook Live. So thank you for those of you who made it through the live or any portion of the live with me live. I'm grateful for your attention. Anyone watching the replay, I'm also grateful for your attention. Oh, I see. There was actually more to this comment. Stephanie said, I used to have serious neck issues, constant neck pain. Excuse me. And to rid the pain in my neck, and nothing ever helped until somebody said, why not try to see the space around the pain? That's really beautiful. Yeah, we can get very focused on the pain or the issue or the thing in a very pointed way rather than, what's around it or just what else. So it's for something like that, it sounds so beautiful to really give the space around it. But a lot of times I had very, very chronic on the right side neck and back issues as well. And so, or I have some women in some of the programs that I've run recently who also deal with chronic pain and chronic health issues. And so when my teachings that are around pleasure are really interesting because it's not about like, don't feel the pain or negate that that's true, but it's like, and is there anywhere that does feel pleasure also? And it might be a totally different spot, right? It might be that I have pain in my right neck and back, but I feel pleasure on my, like inner thigh and it's like, oh, those both coexist at the same time. Thank you for sharing, Stephanie. Okay, so back to completing just in terms of thank you, thank you, thank you. And I always love to hear any ways that ultimately this impacts you. If this touches you in a part of your life and you want to come back and share, I would absolutely love that. So have a full or a widened awareness rest of your day. And ciao for now.